Alan Deutschman, Steve Jobs scholar, noted technology journalist and writer. Welcome to TechCrunch TV.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
So, Alan, I've heard a rumor from Macmillan that you are coming out next year with a book called Why Steve Jobs Matters. Is that correct?
That is correct. I currently have a shorter version that's available as an ebook, or as in the publishing industry they now call an e-slice, called How Steve Jobs Changed Our World. That's kind of a teaser for this longer hardcover book I'm working on that will come out next year from St. Martin's Press, Why Steve Jobs Matters.
So this is your opportunity, Alan, to tease the huge TechCrunch TV audience about why Steve Jobs matters. So stand back a little bit from the day-to-day of the Steve Jobs mania that's currently seizing everybody, and tell us why, in broader historic, cultural, economic, political terms, Steve Jobs matters.
I think that if you look at when Steve Jobs came on the scene into the public eye, it was the end of 1980. And it was really a dark time for American industry, a very difficult time for American society. The 1980s was an awful time for business and economics in America. There was tremendous inflation, unemployment, stagflation. America's industrial might was falling, the auto industry, the steel industry. There was tremendous economic malaise. The country had just elected Ronald Reagan in the hopes of something different. Business, going back to the 1960s, business was seen by the younger generation as the establishment, as soulless, as conformist, as uncreative, as stifling. And for Steve Jobs to come out of the counterculture, here was someone who spent a lot of time on a commune, who was a barefoot, primal screaming, vegetarian hippie, influenced by Bob Dylan. For him to come out of the counterculture and to go into business and to invent this new idea of business that not only could entrepreneurship and technology revive the American economy, revive the American dream, give us a new direction for our nation going into the future, but that business could be an outlet for creativity, that companies could be a force for social improvement and social change. These were revolutionary ideas that represented a tremendous shift culturally for America. And I think it's in this era where we've all grown up with this kind of new attitude towards business and work in our professional lives. You have to remember back when business was seen as stifling. If you look back to movies like The Graduate, where Dustin Hoffman, when he hears plastics, doesn't see an entrepreneurial high-tech opportunity of the future. He just wants to lie in his parents' pool because he can't imagine having a career in business that would be so stifling and conformist. Steve Jobs changed all that. His impact culturally as well as economically had tremendous symbolic value.
What about the role of technology in that? Could it have happened in any industry except technology?
When Apple went public at the end of 1980, a few months earlier, another startup company, had gone public in the San Francisco Bay Area, Genentech, and a lot of the hopes and a lot of the media at the time seized upon the biotech revolution as what might change America, what might be the economic engine of the future, the thing that would have impact on our society. There were so many bio startups that if you read old Time magazines, instead of Silicon Valley, they started calling it Siliclone Valley because of cloning and genetic engineering. And there was a lot of venture capital. There were a lot of hopes that the biotech side would really be the future. Genentech's initial public offering of stock was wildly successful, tremendous run-up in stock price, and that actually happened a little bit before Apple's. So, you can imagine scenarios where, someone else was the Steve Jobs figure, the symbol of entrepreneurship and the future of global business.
How do you think Steve Jobs' obsession with design and his authoritarian style of leadership, why does that matter?
Well, I think it mattered most in the last 10 years when the personal computer was eclipsed by this new generation of very small handheld digital devices like the iPod, smartphones, the iPhone. Design had always been an advantage for Steve Jobs and Apple, particularly because just about no one else in the tech business really cared about it or got it or had skill at it. But the fanatical obsession with design and Steve's level of control and micromanaging at Apple really paid off in the past decade with these new small gadgets where, because of the extremely miniature form factor of the gadgets and of the user interfaces, even the smallest differences in design and user interface could make a tremendous difference in terms of our experience using these as part of our lives day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute. So Steve's obsessiveness, his perfectionist tendencies, his minute attention to detail really found the perfect outlet with these small devices where the design and the engineering on a miniature scale was so critical.
Why do you think Steve Jobs matters, and maybe he doesn't, outside technology, outside business, in government, in education, in energy, in healthcare?
There was an influential book published a few years ago by Richard Florida called The Rise of the Creative Class, with the idea that the most influential group in America today are people for whom creativity is an essential part of their work. And it's a well-known book. And if you look at how Florida defines the creative class, these are people who have tremendous enthusiasm, even passion for their work. They tend to be very technocratic. They look for personal meaning and fulfillment in their working lives. They put an emphasis on innovation. If you look at his profile of these people and their influence in America, it's a very good description of not only Silicon Valley and the employees of Apple, but Apple's consumers, people who have iPhones and MacBooks. The strongest audience for Apple's products tend to be these members of the creative class, or what Florida even calls the super creative subset.
That's me. I've got one. So does that make me creative?
Us. That's especially you, Andrew. You're the poster boy for this. And this is kind of a new thing in America. Different writers have tried to call it different things. First, they started calling them knowledge workers. David Brooks called it bobos for bourgeois bohemians, the creative class. Whatever you call it, this new generation of people who look for creativity in their work, who have an emphasis on change and innovation. Steve Jobs is their patron saint. He is their role model. They connect to him by his personal example. By using Apple products, they feel like they're part of this class. I think more than anyone, Steve Jobs has exemplified, has been the hero for this creative class, the way someone like a John Lennon was a hero for the flower children of the 60s.
So finally, Alan, in the wake of Steve's death, outpouring of grief, many people have said that there's only one Steve Jobs every century or every 250 years. You've written a biography of him. You've followed his career about as closely as anyone. How unique is he? In 100 years' time, will people look back at him as one of the greatest figures of the late 20th century, if not one of the greatest figures of the entire century?
I think that Jobs will be seen as one of the great business figures of the century. I think when you look at the microcomputer revolution from the mid 70s to the present, that the two figures who will really be there in the history books will be Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. I think Jobs will be on the short list of the great figures in the history of Silicon Valley, along with people like Bob Noyce and Gordon Moore and Andy Grove at Intel, or Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard.
But he won't be above them. Are you saying that he'll be spoken about in the same breath? Because those guys don't have the same popular branding or popular affection.
That's true. I mean, Jobs, because he was more than just a great business figure, because he was an important cultural figure, and that this was a tremendous change for a business person to be a cultural figure as well. That will give him a different dimension that will help him stand out in the historical reckoning, just as Bill Gates, rather than having been a pioneer in an important industry and a near monopolist in it for a period of time, will stand out historically for being one of the great philanthropists in American history. So that cultural element, which I'm really looking at in my new book, I think is important. If you look at the other leading figures in business and technology, Thomas Watson Jr. at IBM was an incredibly important figure in the history of business and technology. Fortune magazine in the 80s put him on the cover with the headline, "The Greatest Capitalist of All Times." And he certainly was one of the greatest, but he didn't have the same kind of public recognition, cultural relevance, impact on our lives. Steve Jobs was really the modern figure who turned business people into rock stars, and will stand out beyond the business figures of his time for these other elements.
Well, that's why Steve Jobs matters, and that's why I'm very much looking forward, Alan, to your next book, which hopefully will be out next year, and I'm sure you will reappear on the show to talk more about it. Alan Deutschman, Steve Jobs scholar, thank you so much for appearing on TechCrunch TV.
Thank you, Andrew.